Okay, Mike, all right. Well, what they didn't tell me when they offered me this one was you'll get to follow the debate on whether or not we should regulate masturbation. Imagine my delight. But actually, I think that surfaced something that segues very well into what we're talking about today, because the sex robot is a machine. It's a blender, it's a toaster, it's a sex toy, it's an inanimate object, and yet, and there is, by the way, no evidence, I think we can agree, that real sentient beings with a will can be created from machines. People seem to think this is going to happen. We can't find a pathway where that's going to be true. And yet, set that aside. The fact is, there is something about the interaction this creates with us which is far more vivid, far deeper, far more emotionally resonant than reading print, than hearing a pre-recorded voice. This interaction with something that seems intelligent plays on our own selves in very powerful ways. And that appeared to be the concern of the debate. It isn't limited to sex robots by any means. It is now around us as a part of marketing, as a part of personal entertainment, as a part of education and information seeking, that we have these machines, this software, that attempts to reflect something of how we see the world back at us, and that creates a better engagement. Why don't you talk about your path to creating one of those?
I think it's easy to conclude that none of us really have much of a relationship with, say, Photoshop. As in, I need to work on an image, I'll open up the application, use it, and be happy. But as soon as you move to the conversational UI, for where within that UI you can have these intelligent agents, whatever their job might be, converse with you in natural language, the ability to imagine and really inject emotion into these agents just becomes very easy. Then the real question is it now a game of whether I can fool you into believing that this is a human? And I'm not so sure that I believe that that's a game worth playing. But that doesn't mean that I don't think there's value in applying levels of human emotion into that dialogue. Not to fool you, but because that holds value in the dialogue.
Spend a minute on your product itself for those who don't know, and what it was like to try to build one.
Sure. So me and my 150 propeller head friends have spent the last 4 years in Manhattan trying to build this intelligent agent that can schedule meetings. Meaning that you shoot me an email saying, hey Dennis, I'm going to be in Manhattan in late November, do you got time to meet up? I can reply back in my email client and say, yeah, I'll be up for a Diet Coke. I have CC'd in Amy at x.ai, and she can help put something on my calendar. She will now remove me from the conversation, reach out to one or more participants, and have these very human-like negotiations, really, and drive them towards conclusion, and upon conclusion, send out an invite. And it's not that you haven't heard that story before, as in, you heard that story the last half century. You can buy it. It's called The Human, to do that particular chore. We would just like to kind of democratize that so it's not a luxury anymore.
Right, and the calendar is a particularly interesting thing because it seems so simple, but it's such a rich part of our lives, particularly in business. And what you're building there is a calendaring tool, which is trickier. Working through the back end of the calendaring and creating convenience and taking out friction, or building a UI like Amy that pretends or creates a sense of interaction so that you'll work the back-end technology better yourself.
The matter of the fact is, if I ask anybody in here if you did a meeting this week or the week prior, you would all say yes. And if you don't say yes, you're fucking lying. And if I ask every one of you, did you like actually setting up that meeting? You would say, no, I fucking hate it.
Yeah.
And it's
not the most productive part of your week.
It just doesn't add any value. You and me talking, that's the valuable part. Setting up the meeting, not so valuable. But that's not a new pain. As in, that's a pain you and me picked up exactly 2 hours out of college 20 years ago, for me at least. And I just stuck to it for 20 years straight. So I just don't think that there's any app or extension or plugin or web service, Tungle Me, Doodle Me, that's going to solve it, because we ran that experiment already. If you ask people though, it sounds like if I could hire somebody to do this one chore, I think I won in life. As in, I'm now VP of whatever, and I get a human to kind of do this. How wonderful. So we always started out with the idea that it was not one for us to kind of solve the calendar challenge, even though that's what we do, but to replicate that experience. And to answer your question from before, the real hard part is actually not the kind of technical back end of trying to kind of manage the kind of somewhat deterministic setup of a calendar, but the human language part. That's any objective you give Amy or Andrew, such as set something up at the office later next week in the afternoon. Just picking up on that, however simple it might sound in my Danish English, is just hard.
Right. There's a lot of very vague information there that overlays in a way that's quite specific, and you have to teach the machine to concatenate that correctly. Technically very hard.
Super hard. Hard because people are crazy. And it would just be great if they were not crazy, that you could tell the machine, let's meet up on Wednesday, 1300 hours, EST, on 200 Broadway, 10005, New York, New York. This is not how we talk.
Yeah.
You'll say all sorts of things. Let's do 1 o'clock because I have that PTA meeting with my kids at 2 o'clock, so I might not be finished until 3. But we could obviously do shortly thereafter. That little kind of PTA story about you and your kids doesn't matter, but that's how we talk. And we have to exist in that universe, and that makes it complex.
But away from that natural language processing issue, the layer above that is this persona of Amy, this interaction. And why is that so critical in what you're creating?
I think a very large amount of the apps in the App Store shouldn't be there. As in, we somehow just signed up for the idea that for every pain point we have, the app is the solution. Here's a short story. I arrive at the Hilton, 11 p.m., and I want a Diet Coke. My first line of thought is not, let me go to the App Store, find the Hilton app, install that on my phone, set up an account, log in with my new credentials, find the store, add Diet Coke. As in, that's not what I need. I probably need a different interface for that. An Alexa in the corner, so I can just scream Diet Coke, sit in my underwear, wait 5 minutes, and a Diet Coke arrives. So I think there's going to be this mass move to a conversational UI. And I think once we're within the conversational UI, we will want intelligent agents. But I think the agents sometimes will be machine-driven, but I think some of them will be human. And that's fine. When I call the lobby, that's a human. I don't mind. It's an agent nevertheless. So I think we need to figure out a common language for the machine and human agents, and that seems to be...
You do see that happening too. I know people who are building, in fact, a specific vertical Google Home or Alexa type object for hotels. And it's strictly inside the language of the hotel and the need of the hotel, and programmed locally a few things. Easy interface and voice activated. One thing I wanted to ask you about though was the creation of persona and the choices you make, because it is notable, nay astonishing, how often the persona, be it Amy or Alexa or Google Home or Cortana or driving directions, is the persona of a young woman, seemingly you would say with some college. You know, there's a whole sort of social status they've established. And I talked to several companies about this, and the focus groups say, well, that's who people are the most comfortable with. And that sort of circles back to what I was saying around the previous debate and the power of narcissism. You have to make money in the marketplace, so you have to go with what people are comfortable with, but are you reaffirming their prejudices in a whole new way?
I think there's two parts to this. There's certainly the part for where the industry leaned towards picking the female assistant. So we, very early on, allowed people to choose between Andrew and Amy. The funny thing here is that most men pick Amy, but most women pick Andrew.
They pick Andrew.
They
really?
pick Andrew. But that's a whole separate kind of discussion we can have.
That's not the case with Siri. But
that's the case in our network, at least.
Okay.
The interesting thing to me here is that you can choose to humanize it, to kind of use a dramatic word, or you can choose not to. I'm just not sure that the amount of success we achieve in the network, whether that is measured by successful meeting schedule based on requests, will be at a level where it's at if I pick more of a bag of templates, Verizon phone tree type thing, for where you know very quickly this is not humanized, it's really just command driven, versus that of humanizing it. Because once you humanize it, you can start to implement different tactics. So we have levels of empathy. Obviously not human empathy or the idea that the machine have any level of empathy, but we portray empathy. And we portray empathy to people who know this is a machine.
Give me an example of portraying empathy.
So you and me are supposed to meet up on December 4th in Manhattan. Something happens, I have to reschedule. Something happens, I have to reschedule again. Something bloody happens again, and for the third time, I reschedule.
You're snubbing me.
Amy obviously have no real idea, and she can loop this 17 times over and not care. You care though, as in Dennis was kind of a nice guy, now I think he's a little bit of an asshole. And you need to kind of allow yourself to figure out, do I even want that meeting?
Right.
What we have seen is if Amy recognizes the fact that this is slightly unfortunate and starts out with a simple way of saying that to a full-on apology on a third retry, that level of emotion for where she also knows this is unfortunate increases the probability of the meeting being kept intact. Think about that. As in, people know this is a machine. They know the emotion we portray is not real. But just by the fact that it's visualized, have them say, perhaps Dennis isn't an asshole. He's just busy.
So it's interesting. In some cases, people will build these voice interfaces and actually program in mistakes that humans make in order to feel like it's a more trustworthy object. If you go to some mapping directions companies in Europe, if you start in France and you drive into Germany, they will pronounce the name of the German town as if it's French. And it gives the driver a sense of comfort because the map doesn't start coming at you with a German accent all of a sudden. It's factually incorrect, but it's emotionally appropriate to make that kind of choice.
I think it is, and I think we're certainly naive if we believe that relationships are not being created here. So we certainly see relationships being created with our agents. We can talk about what type of relationships, but they're certainly existing at some level. As in, I bloody work there. I still start out most of my requests with, Amy, would you be so kind? As in, how much time do I have in my life? Amy, would you be so kind? I'll give you another stat here for the fun of it. So in 11% of all the meetings we set up, hundreds of thousands of meetings, at least one of the emails in that dialogue will have no other intent than gratitude. As in, somebody who knew this was a machine went back and said, thank you very much.
Thank the robot.
Really appreciate you setting this up on Friday this week. As in, that
I know you're a very busy piece of software, and I really appreciate your time. Wow.
Not 1 out of 1,000, 11%.
That's astonishing. And people want to be connected. It just shows that's what's being leveraged in a way. People want to be looked at, and that's a very powerful design point, and they want to be connected to a point where they'll talk to machines.
I'll give you another good analog here. So we have some people in the very traditional sense, given that we expose the dialogue. So if you are the boss of Amy, you can see what she talk about to all of your guests. So you can just jump in and ask her, hey, what did you and John talk about? And she'll send that back, and you can see the whole dialogue. For where people use that as a backdrop for where I think John is a little bit rude. As in, I don't think I like John that much, actually, in the way he treated Amy. Even though I don't care whether you triple click on any icon in Photoshop. As in, you can click all you want. You can click harder on the mouse if you want to. I actually don't really care.
He's kind of hard on a keyboard, that guy. Nobody would say that.
I don't like the way you treat Photoshop. But somehow there's a different relationship here for where I don't like the way he talked to Amy.
voice is just very primal. You know, it's,
Yeah.
there we are sort of turning words into meaning by
Yeah.
ingesting it and expressing it. People sense this and it becomes this
Yeah.
very primal connection. How do you learn this? Is this being taught now? I mean, how do you recruit for this? How do you learn this? There must have been a lot of trial and error, but now this is a kind of mass function. This is engineered. How do people learn how to do this stuff well?
So I certainly think that most of the kind of NLP and machine learning end of the equation, there's a set of people which we can go look for.
That's technical and fairly established. We sell tools, other people sell
Yes,
tools.
so that's
Yeah.
certainly achievable, right? But there's the whole design process, which is a new science, right? For where if you and me are going to engineer an app over the weekend, we have some idea of who to call for UI or UX or information architecture type input.
Yeah.
Those are well-rounded disciplines for where we know what I expect from that person. What does an AI interaction designer do? Who actually designs the dialogue? Who designs the reasoning engine? As in,
Yeah.
you say you're running late, what type of action do I take? Who are those people and where do I find them? And I'll give you, and we certainly made plenty of mistakes, expensive ones, but we ended up hiring initially drama majors for the initial design of the agent.
Bless you, my child. Futures for the liberal arts.
Yeah, I think they're coming back strong.
Yeah, I do too, because they are schooled in human relationships and how we derive meaning. That turns out to be a big UI factor.
It does, and it's just a different type of UI design, right? For where, if I go see Macbeth, I'm not going to check whether the syntax was correct, as in every word you said is as I've read it in school. No, I'm going to look at that character and walk away and say, interesting, a little bit sad, but interesting nevertheless.
Right.
And that, I think, is what we're trying to embed into these agents. And again, I would really like to kind of underline here, not to fool people. As in, I'd much rather we tell people up front, hey, this is a machine, but we do the job so well that in the end you say, hey, thanks, Amy.
Yeah, I'm talking to software and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
We're at the end of the clock, but I really got to ask you, what is the most challenging thing you want to build next?
Perhaps this is just half therapy for me now, but our investors, as I'm sure you can imagine, will ask on a bi-weekly basis, so hey, can't we translate this into a new language?
Right.
Because you only do English, and it would be wonderful if you could do some set of languages anywhere in Asia. Hey, dude, it's not just about translating the language. We probably need to train not only
nuance into, you are reflecting a society back on itself when you build one of these.
That's my point.
Yeah.
That it's actually not just the translation, which is actually a whole new kind of training exercise, a new corpus and what have you from a machine learning point of view. But there's actually a design aspect for where, how aggressively can I remind people whether the 2 o'clock meeting tomorrow is okay? Pretty aggressively on Wall Street where I live. Probably not so aggressively, I would guess.
To a superior in Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to lean like that.
So that's a different design.
Interesting problem. Dennis, thank you so much for your time.
This was fun.
Thank
Cheers.
you. All right.